Episode 5 of the Covenant Table Podcast in 5, 4, 3, 2.
Welcome, everyone, to the Covenant Table Podcast. Thanks for being here. We have a special guest, Marsha Hicks, a repeat guest. You've been on here a number of times.
I have.
Yeah.
I think we gave her the official title friend of the show. That happened a long time ago.
I think it's official.
That's nice.
It's also official too. I wore a jacket because it's podcast day.
Yeah, you look fancy.
But I promise not to make jokes about Sport Coat Steve.
Sport Coat Steve. It's only going to happen once. It's only today. It'll never happen again.
No,
But
never say never.
never say never.
I'm a little jealous.
Jonathan and I might wear them next month.
Well, I'm just kind of cold. You guys are all nice and warm. It's like cold in here.
Yeah.
Bring your flannel.
It is. It is a flannel kind of day. I went for a bike ride today. It was brisk. We'll just say that. The temperature started with the number 3. Wasn't the brightest idea. Well, hey, we're going to talk about a lot of different things today. We're going to talk about we're going to do some of our regular segments, do a surprise question, but we're going to start with something about the Bible that's often misquoted.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The Bible says what?
The Lord has plans for you. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you hope in a future. Mm-hmm. Good. We're glad.
The Bible says what?
We're glad that's true, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what's the problem with it? Sounds great.
So
slap it on a mug. Let's go.
So it's Jeremiah 29:11.
Yeah. Let me read it one more time. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you hope in a future. How can we talk about this verse without ruining it for everyone and also understand it in its context? That's probably the topic. I guess that's the topic, right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I think there's a way.
Good. Let's go.
Let's do it.
Take it away,
What do you
Marsha.
think it's all about? What's it all about?
Right.
Well, tell us. I want to hear from you what the context is.
Well, okay. I guess I'll short intro, and we can go as deep as you guys want into it. The people, God's people, the Jews, specifically the southern nation, Judah, had been carried into exile into Babylon. They were defeated militarily. God, through his prophets, says that he allowed it. He actually uses the phrase several times, I sent you into exile. And now the people are in Babylon, especially all of the priests, the artisans, the scholars, like they took the talent. Babylon would take the talent and leave some of the farmers and so on. And that's not our commentary on the different jobs. That's the Babylonians' commentary on the different jobs. And then one of the prophets, actually, Jeremiah, was still in Judea and wrote a letter to the exiles, encouraging them how they should live in exile, trying to give them guidance. And there were some false prophets that he calls out as being false prophets, and he's saying, I'm going to give you the actual instructions from God. And that in those instructions is where this verse is found. Is that a good short?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's good.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So meant for specific people at a specific time under specific circumstances is what you're saying.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's
First
also
audience.
it's
right? First audience, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
just a few verses before. It's the seek the welfare. Here, it's this verse. Verse 7 is seek the welfare of the city where I brought you, sent you into exile, and pray to the Lord on its behalf, for in its welfare you will find your welfare. So it's and he actually instructs them earlier, just a few verses earlier, to all the exiles I have sent into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon. So God did that, and it was a judgment. And they were wondering, hey, is there no future for us? It's like God done with us. Are there any promises for us? So there's this hopeful word. Build houses and live in them, plant gardens and eat their produce, take wives and have sons and daughters, take wives for your sons, and give your daughters in marriage, that they may bear sons and daughters, multiply there, do not decrease, but seek the welfare of the city where I've sent you into exile, and pray to the Lord on its behalf, for in its welfare you will find your welfare. Then the don't be deceived, and then the hey, I know the plans I have for you. Mm-hmm. So it's I always quoted that when I lived in Center City, Philadelphia, I always quoted that city verse. Look, hey, we're like God's people then. This world is not our home. The cities that we live in now, the towns we live in now, not our permanent home, but we're to seek the blessing of the place where God has called us, and pray for the place where God's placed you, and seek its welfare. But
where all have you guys seen verse 11 used? Where do you hear it? Where's it get used?
Well, I feel like a lot of the segments that we've done, these Bible Says What segments have been, people are trying to make sense of difficult situations, trying to bring comfort to someone who's, suffering in some way. And I feel like this certainly gets employed in that way. It's, as you pointed out, it's on the mugs, on the pillows, on the signs, in the living room, all that kind of stuff. To me, the interesting question here is one of biblical interpretation, and the kind of critical historical way of reading the Bible is more recent, right? Where we're actually trying to get into the minds of, okay, who wrote this and why, and what would the original audience have understood, from this. But so then the question comes in, when is it okay for us to take a passage like this and be like, hey, this applies to us, this applies to now, and when is it inappropriate to do that kind of thing? Because I think that's what happens. People kind of pick it out of context, and it just becomes this very broad, well, God has a plan for me, or has a plan for you. And so while that's true, right, we're not disagreeing with that. At the same time, it's like how, it's just an interesting question of how we utilize biblical text, how we understand the appropriate way to make sense of it for our lives. Because there's certainly lots of scriptures where the you or the we in that scripture, we wouldn't say that applies to us, right? So I think that's the interesting question, one of kind of an interpretive lens.
Yeah, you mentioned pillows, coffee mugs, house decor.
Cards.
That's the one I was thinking of.
Yeah,
Thank
were you? Yeah,
what was it?
graduation cards.
I think it's the most famous graduation verse of all time.
Absolutely. Yeah. Because parents want a guarantee, and they want their children to think that their future is going to be bright and good. Yeah. And unfortunately, because, well, we've all lived long enough that we know life is disappointing. Right. That you can actually move into a space in your life and really even have discerned that with the Lord and things like that, and have a major fail in your life and go, wait a minute, I thought this was the plan you had for me, and it looks very different than what I thought the guarantee was going to be. And so, it can stir up, if you're giving somebody a guarantee and then it goes south to them.
Right.
right.
If we think that God meant this will all come easy.
Yeah.
Because I think maybe that's part of what happens with picking the one verse and not the whole context, is it sounds like it's going to be so easy.
Yeah.
God, I just got all this good for you. And God's not going to harm you. Plans for good hope in the future. We believe that's true. Like, I think you can actually,
in Jesus,
I think you can ultimately say that verse is true for Christians. But what doesn't get said is, I think people have like a background expectation that that'll come easy, that it'll be there won't be pain in it. There won't be failure, disappointment, heartache, betrayals. And these are people that are living in some of the deepest suffering, deeper than many of us could imagine. Most of them would have had relatives slaughtered before they went into exile, businesses destroyed, careers uprooted, homes destroyed, families separated, and now they're in this city in exile, thinking, you're in the middle of the seat of power of the world empire of the time. There's no going home. And God is asking us to be good citizens here, like to live with hope for this city of Babylon, this evil place. And he's saying, someday I'll actually bring you back home. I'm going to restore your fortunes. Do you have plans for you? But in the context, it's not like, hey, this is all easy.
Right.
Makes me think that verse in the Gospels where Jesus says, whoever's will follow me must give up father, mother, children, lands, and I will restore father, mother, children, lands, but not without trouble.
Yeah.
And that part always got me. The not without trouble is that there isn't a guarantee that things are always going to go super smoothly, because that's, but we are eternal beings, and in the future, all things are restored and everything is made right, but here we have to wrestle with, what ends up happening, the reality of living in a fallen world. It all comes back to, again, do we believe God will be with you? If you believe God will be with you, well, then yes, your future is good.
Yeah. Right.
Your future is good. He will be with you no matter what happens.
How do we learn to do what Jesus said, which is pray for your enemies? How do you pray for those who persecute you and bless them? And I think
we quote Jeremiah 29:11 over them.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think we say that about them, and we realize that it's true for us, and that the call in this original context is to be doing what Jesus will later say is pray for your enemies and bless the ones that persecute you, because that ultimately God has everything in his hands and he will take care of you. Like he's gonna bring justice. He's gonna restore what was lost. But the call in it for the believer is, so treat people who have treated you unjustly with better than they deserve. Do for others what you wish they would do for you. Right. I think this is where some of Jesus's most famous lines are rooted, in this mentality of a people historically that were slaves in Egypt, exiles in Babylon, and still had this ministry that they were called to by God, to be for the cities, for the world, for the people, even the hardest people.
It makes me think of Psalm 139, just to rip off of that a little bit. Here we talk about, God made you, I'm wonderfully made, all of those things. And it says in there, God knows all the days, the purpose for your life. And then there's this little weird section at the end of Psalm 139 where it's like, I hate those who hate you. He gets really mad, and says all of that, and then says, search me, O God. And I think, it's so interesting how in the middle of that we can say, yes, God, you know everything about me. You made me, and I rest in that, and I see, but I am still struggling with people in my life. And that's why I need to open my life up to you and invite you to search me and know me and shape my feelings about people, shape my feelings about the world.
Yeah.
It's good. I haven't thought about that for a long time. That they didn't want to be in Babylon.
Oh yeah.
They surely didn't like it. The Babylonians are really wicked and cruel. And God's like, hey, I haven't completely forgotten about you. Later he says, hey, the people who are left, he's going to judge them too. So they have experienced this severe discipline. And some of that's coming for the people who are God's people who are left in the promised land. But while you're here in Babylon, pray for this place and seek to bless it.
Yes.
And ultimately, there's wonderful verses in Jeremiah about the new covenant, this future thing that God's going to do. That's even going to be, it's going to restore them and even bring hope and healing to the world. Openly, there's this word of promise about Christ that's going to make up for that suffering.
So put it on the graduation cards. Let's do it. I'm all for it. If we just could give each other a little bit of, shepherding, some counsel, some guidance to say,
what would you write?
This is the, I would write them, the Lord has plans for you to keep you and not to harm you. And remember that when it comes time to deal with your new roommate, and all of the laundry that they don't do,
the Babylonians in your
and
life,
all the lies they tell about you.
Can I even give a suggestion even for the practicality of now? So say someone in their solitude time, their devotional time, they come up to this verse, and they want to sit on this verse and claim this verse. And, I think two ways to approach a passage like this, even let's make it practical to right now for all of us, is to read the verse and ask yourself the question, what about this makes me feel a demand for, make all the plans good for me? Where does it draw out kind of a part of your heart that wants the guarantee, and process that with the Lord? You just pray into that. And then also, where does it make you long for God to step into those things? I think just to even make it more practically is like, how can we help people to lean into passages like this and sit with them and really process through, what does it bring up? Either way,
Who in our news cycle, presently is the closest to the situation of this context that would receive a verse like this from the Lord? Where would this apply in our current news cycle? I mean, I'm gonna carefully offer this. The captives that were taken by Hamas into Gaza were done an incredible injustice. Like what Hamas did was evil, indisputably evil. But if there's Christians among them, or God-fearers, people that love God, I think his message to people in situations like that is, you're here even in this situation knowing that I have a plan and a future for you, and so do some good for these evildoers while you're amongst them. Because this is such a hard thing in the New Testament of like why Paul doesn't say let's get rid of slavery. You know how tough this topic is. I feel like the weight of even bringing this up. But Paul doesn't just come out and say, hey, let's do everything we can to abolish slavery. It didn't seem in their world like that was even possible. Like there wasn't a path for that. There wasn't a path forward for that.
And a lot of slavery was different.
Instead is he's like, you have a master in heaven. Live like that. Live in a way that your owners or masters have nothing to despise the faith. Like bless them.
Yeah, I think
That's
Peter
hard
says that
instruction.
too.
It's
in
really,
the
Peter does too.
Yeah.
It's really hard to think that like the advice from Jeremiah, the apostles, and Jesus is when someone slaps you on one cheek, turn the other cheek. Like when you are persecuted, bless those who persecute you. If you are enslaved. Now, Paul will also say, if it's possible for you to seek your freedom, do it. Like it's good. If you can get your freedom, do it. And I think Jeremiah is also like, one day you're going to come home from exile. Like it's not the plan for you to stay there forever. God wants to deliver you from it. But while you're there, ministry opportunities haven't ceased.
Yeah.
The chance to bless hasn't ceased. And did I say that in a way that was fair? Do you guys want to soften that? Or
It's a complicated thing because like ultimately every human being is made in the image of God, and like what chattel slavery, the way that was practiced in North America was really wicked and wrong. And the seeds of seeing that that's wrong are like just the biblical vision of humanity. And yet in the ancient world, I mean, there were slaves that were prisoners of war. There was also a lot of indentured servants too that were called servants. Sure. The same word is used. Hey, I'm going to basically sell the labor of this many years and live as a servant for this many years. And it was more like some of the slavery was more like indentured servanthood than, chattel slavery.
Sure.
And people have misquoted, and there was people in America that distorted the scriptures about slavery, kind of argue for it, which I know that's not what you're doing.
No, we have no
but
more
I just want to be clear about that.
Right to excuse the injustice of slavery than we do the injustice of jihad. Like it's an evil. And that's the reason why these instructions are so weighty, is that there's other places in the scripture that talk about doing good for those who are evil is like heaping burning coals in their lap. It's like doing good in the face of great evil helps set the contrast of the two and shows which is righteous and which is evil by persistently reaching for righteous acts in the face of evil opposition.
Doing good when you've been deeply wrong.
Yeah.
Which is that was the word to this people.
Yeah.
And that's what you're bringing up.
Yeah.
Doing good when people have done.
Yeah.
I personally, that even helps me, because I feel like when I hear this, I mean, let's face it, when things get just overused over and over and over again, you're kind of like, okay, I'm tired of hearing that. And also when you're feeling like, hey, this is kind of plucked out of context and the way you're using that is not really applicable here, and you're just comforting yourself and, those kinds of ways. So like sometimes these verses and the way they get, it can almost become a little icky, and you're just like, oh, stop it, But to put this verse in that kind of context where this is about, loving enemies, this is about these weighty instructions of how to love people who are deeply wronging you and your people. I think that's such a beautiful thing. I wish people would just know that, you know what I mean? When we reference a verse like this, it's not just hey, you're not sure what job you're going to have? Well, don't worry, because here's Jeremiah 29:11. You know what I mean?
Right.
But it's a deep, weighty thing. It is.
Ultimately, and yeah, part of the big picture context is the promise of Jeremiah 31, which is, even though my covenant that they broke, though I was their husband, declares the Lord, God promises, 31:31, I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and the house of Judah. And he's ultimately talking about a future knowledge of God. I will put my law within them. I will write it on their hearts. I will be their God. They shall be my people. No longer shall each teach his neighbor and each his brother, saying, know the Lord, for they shall all know me, from the least to the greatest. And I will forgive their iniquities, and I will remember their sin no more. Declares the Lord. So ultimately, it's like new covenant, Jesus, people are going to know me in a different way, know my ways, have my ways on their heart in a different way. That's the big picture hope. So let's be grateful for Jesus.
Yeah. That's
and
actually
wrestle through our. I'm always going to introduce this and wrestle through our wrong God narratives that will keep us from trusting Him. I mean, I look at a passage like this, and the ultimate is trusting God, processing yourself so that you then can love others, so that out of that space, you will love others. If you don't have a proper God narrative, you will not have the motivation to love your enemy, or to, process yourself in your own heart. So,
Well said by a experienced counselor.
And
I just love God. That's it.
You got to work through your own stuff. You got to work through your own stuff.
Here's the disclaimer I think I was kind of working towards. I think I told you, I feel the weight of using analogies and comparisons like that. We should still try to bring captives free. Like the captives that have been, it's not like that means you just leave people in that situation. And also this shouldn't be used, should not be allowed to be used so that abusers tell other people, like your duty is just to behave well under the thumb of this oppression or mistreatment.
It's not a justification.
It's not an excuse for the evil that's done.
Yeah.
But it does it gives me, if I'm ever in a place of being victimized, abused, if, I was taken captive by somebody, if I was mugged, if I just feel like people in my life were treating me wrong or my boss was treating me wrong, it gives me some agency. Like it's an offer from God, I think, of some agency to actually say your choices aren't all dark. You can still be light in this place.
Or even the things that have
That
happened.
makes a ton of sense.
Does that help?
No, it does.
I'm a little worried about these things getting used to further even more evil. I'm a little worried sometimes about the message of do unto others, can be used by evil people to further even more evil.
Yeah. And having a God narrative, knowing who God is to you. Hey, it's easy to bless others if you know how you're deeply blessed in Christ. As a Christian, we have, there's resources there. Know how deeply blessed we are in Christ, deeply loved, deeply forgiven. It gives us resources to extend, when we're being wronged.
Yeah. And so I guess the last thing I'll say about it is we started a conversation a month ago about action and contemplation.
Mm-hmm.
This is one of those places where they're both needed, and you really can't live without them in tandem.
Both.
Yeah, there has to be contemplation on the calling here, and also action for goodness, for justice, for peace.
It's good.
Yeah.
That kind of takes us into our next segment.
Yeah, I was thinking, and especially you bringing up, the idea of the new covenant, and we're going to do our segment where we talk about the mysteries and paradoxes and balances and tensions of Christian discipleship. It's called Lives in the Balance.
There are lives in the balance. There are lives in the balance. There are.
All right.
Where's that from? Where's the song from? Where's the clip?
That is that's Jackson Browne.
There you go.
Do you know Jackson Browne?
I do.
Yeah.
All right. So
I might have. I don't remember if I said this before,
balance.
but specifically, it's from the greatest TV show of all time, Miami Vice.
I think you did say that once before. Yeah.
I think you did.
You said it. I blocked it out. I forgot where it was from. I forgot it was mine.
All the MASH fans turned off the show and won't listen to us ever again.
All right.
So this week's
Lives in the Balance. We are talking about relational versus transactional. And I think the first thing in this conversation, what we got to do is get our arms around what those words mean, what we're talking about. But how do we engage with God? How do we engage with the church, with spiritual disciplines, with our friends, family, our spouses? Are we in a relational mindset, or are we in a transactional mindset? And I thought a good way of approaching this to kind of get at what these words might mean to us is looking at the difference between a contract and a covenant. And so, before I did full-time ministry, I was involved in a lot of real estate and construction. And part of my job was writing contracts. And, I'm sure everybody's signed a contract at one point or another. But I really got into it. I liked writing them and getting into all the ifs and thens and, trying to imagine all the different contingencies. And that's what a contract really is all about. It's a conditional agreement. There's a quid pro quo. You give me this, I'll give you that. There's terms, there's conditions, there's fine print. Most of the time we skip over, but we know that there's a whole bunch of fine print because somebody's trying to protect themselves from a whole bunch of different situations that might happen. But at the end of the day, a contract is an agreement. It's conditional. It's for a finite period of time, and it's based on performance. Like I said, the if-then, mentality. Whereas a covenant, to kind of differentiate it from that, it's not conditional. It's an unconditional agreement. It's a promise. It's not a quid pro quo where you give me this, I'll give you that. It's just, I'm giving you this. And it's, as opposed to it being based on performance, it's based on the character of the one making the covenant. And so, those are kind of like more, we don't use outside of church and of spirituality. We don't talk about covenants as much, like in our just context, socially and whatnot. But, but we're very familiar with that contract idea is. And I think actually where I would launch us into this conversation would just be to say that, our culture definitely thrusts us in the direction of wanting to make everything a contract and wanting to think of things in terms of, well, if you don't do this, then I won't do that. And if I do this, then you have to do that. And so that to me is the transactional piece of it. Whereas if we're approaching our relationships with God or with other people or with prayer or whatever it is, transactionally, we have that like contract mindset. Whereas if we're approaching those same things with a relational mindset, we're thinking in terms of covenant, and we're thinking in terms of unconditional promises and the character of the one making the promises and things like that. So we talk about covenant maybe in marriage. That's the main place that we would use the word covenant, in our current context. But so what do you guys think about that? I mean, the what does it look like in different areas of life? We're doing a series on sexuality. That's definitely an area where we want to touch on in terms of what it looks to be transactionally minded versus relationally minded. But I think it applies to a lot of different areas of life and spirituality. And yeah.
You know where my mind goes first? We have over 50 people joining the church. And at Liberty, the church I was at before coming to Covenant, we had talked about, I was burnt out on the word membership. It's obviously a biblical word. You're a member of the body, but you can be a member of Costco, a member of Planet Fitness, and it's transactional. When you quit paying, you're not a member anymore.
Right.
And so membership at Liberty was being in Covenant. Membership Day was Covenant Entrance Day. We're actually, and so I've tried to introduce that idea here at Covenant. We're entering a covenant community. We'll have the Lord's Supper this week, baptize a bunch of people, the meal, the new covenant, and it's an opposite. It's countercultural to consumerism and a consumeristic culture, which is pure transactional. What do I get out of it? I'll rate the service afterwards. I gave Huber 2.5 stars. He was a little off, maybe 1 star. And versus it's countercultural to just make a commitment to a community that's relational and depending on the grace of God. So that's why one of the reasons why I think it's good for people, because it breaks us out of joining the church, joining a covenant community, making public vows. It's a really countercultural move. When else do we do that? We never do that. Apparently that made no sense. No,
I mean, I think you're giving people permission to speak into your life when you do that. You're really giving, in
theory.
In theory, in the hope, that it's a relationship that goes back and forth in good and bad, in times of questioning, and times of hurting, and times of anger, and times of that you won't leave, that you will stay and work things through. Yeah. That you'll submit to authority. I think there is that part too. Yeah. With staying, in a covenant versus a contract.
I promise ahead of time to seek the peace of this community and to be led by imperfect leaders, which is a big step of faith. But I just, a book, I should have brought it into the podcast, but it's in my bag. I might get it. It's in my bag in the corner, but it's a book about how choice actually makes life so confusing that it just messes us up. Unlimited choices. And this has happened to everybody. You're flipping through Netflix instead of watching one movie.
It's too much.
It's just too much.
Well, it makes me think of Adam one Christmas. We gave him presents. We just kept giving him presents after presents. Finally, he was just like, no, thank you.
It's too much.
Thank you.
I was like, no, thank you. How old was he?
No, thank you. He was under 5, too much.
Fun.
Enough.
Too much.
Enough.
Too many choices.
Yeah.
Let me play with the box.
Thank you. Yes.
While you were asking your very good question, and you could see the blank look on my face as I wasn't here in the room with you, I was thinking about Jim Halpert from The Office. He goes to the golf course to make a sale. There's an episode where he goes to the golf course, and I was trying to remember what it is he says, but this is just what I remember. My impression of this episode is he's playing golf, and the businessmen he's with just want to have a good time and be friends and play golf, and he keeps awkwardly interjecting into the middle of the golf round.
He's trying to close a deal.
About those prices.
Yeah.
About what price would it take? Yeah. And he's totally there just for the deal, not for any relationship. And I guess he doesn't have the sense of when to offer that. These guys probably do want to buy paper. They do want to make a transaction, but they also want to do that with a person they like, that they trust. And he's kind of missing that. And so that was just in my mind. I think we can all picture the guy who comes into the room of friends and is let's make a deal.
Yeah.
It
does feel like, we're always wait for that other shoe to drop. Like we don't. You're saying it's a very countercultural move, and I think it is. And I think that a lot of times people are waiting for, okay, so what's the catch? You know what I mean? There's always a catch, because there's no such thing as just covenantal love. There's no such thing as just like joining a family and just being loved unconditionally. It's always like, okay, so what's the sale? You know what I mean? What's the thing I have to do? And I feel like that was, it's countercultural now. I think it was countercultural in Jesus' time too. You know what I mean? I think the idea of God as a loving father was revolutionary. You know what I mean? That because if you think of God as a loving father, then it's not a, especially, the language about adoption in the New Testament, adopted sons and had like, in some ways more rights, you know what I mean? To inheritance and to blessing than natural born ones. And so like the idea that God is a loving father and you're adopted is like, there's nothing you have to do. There's no catch. There's no sale. There's no, you know what I mean? Like that, like that's who God is. And so like that idea, I think was so revolutionary, because you don't see really the talk about, that's new with Jesus. In other words, in the Old Testament and the Old Covenant language, I think the pictures of God were different. And I think the way we relate to God and to church and to other people and all this, they're all connected, right? Because we just have a mindset about how this stuff is supposed to work. But I think we like deep down, we kind of like default to that contractual, transactional level of understanding of things rather than being able to rest in a relational, covenantal type of
I
truth.
think we do that because in some ways, let's just say for some people, their God narrative gets shaped by their earliest memories of other caregivers in their lives, just to kind of bring that in.
Yeah.
And if you grow up in a very authoritative, am I saying the right one? Where you are good if you behave and you are very bad if you misbehave, and you get rejected, and
If you misbehave.
you get shunned, you feel mom and dad's love withdraw from you in some way. It's very hard then when we come, like, let's bring it into the spiritual life then. It's very hard then to come to a God where you think it's transactional then. You actually do think if I'm really, really good, then he'll give me X, Y, or Z. Or if I follow the rules, okay, I have to pray, I have to do 30 minutes, read a chapter in my Bible, and that's not a relationship. That is transactional.
Right.
That is coming from like another place. So you brought up like all the names of like Father. People really wrestle with that in their spiritual life because they have to really work through that old narrative and say, well, then who is God? And well, how do you do that? I mean,
Yeah. I think sometimes churches can, so our understanding of God the Father needs to be reworked and shaped by the gospel. Also, the way churches present themselves can be like, hey, we provide these services. These things are great. These are great for you. We've got great groups for you. Great, this teaching for you.
We're like PBS. Send in your donations and continue this great program.
Instead of being like, hey, the call of a Christian is to follow Jesus together. And there's an invitation to be part of this loving community. We're supposed Jesus gave us one command to love each other as we have been loved. And we're trying to live that out here. You know, that'd be a different way to present that.
Yeah, almost have to be super intentional about not letting that be the subtext so that people, I hear what you're saying. It's a loving community, but there's some things you expect from me, right? And there's some things I can expect from you, right? It's it's kind of like the contract lives beneath the surface unless we're very intentional about it.
I think we need to handle that honestly, though, is that the reason for that is that covenants aren't unconditional. I think we use some language about unconditional covenants. I'm not sure that's fair or right language to use.
Or maybe it'd be a way to say the covenant that God invites us into is a covenant of grace.
Yeah, I
It's
agree
based
with
It's a
on
that.
covenant
him.
of grace.
Absolutely.
Yes.
There's
not based on
forgiveness.
us.
That's absolutely true. That's
Right.
what I think Jonathan's
Yeah.
getting at. It's not like, someone can say like, I don't want to be a Christian anymore, and put themselves out of covenant. Now, I, in that situation, still pursue that person, and love that person and try to have engagement, which is like the unconditional aspect of it. But you're pointing out like someone can say, hey, I want out of this covenant. I want to.
Well, I am saying that, but I'm
Leave
also
this God.
saying that covenant relationships are still conditioned on faithfulness. Like there's still an element of faithfulness. So now, I don't want to make this too confusing about like salvation, because the precondition for salvation is faithfulness. It's the faithfulness of Jesus. That's the precondition of our salvation, right? But let's just be a little bit more down to earth. Like a marriage relationship still has conditions. Like there's still conditions. It's not transactional. Hopefully, it shouldn't be transactional. But transactions aren't the only kind of conditions. There's faithfulness conditions, and so there's a you for me, I for you. There's some definition, like there's dynamics of what does faithfulness look like in a covenantal relationship. The language for it.
I've said that in a marriage sermon.
Yeah,
before,
I think you
that
have.
It's like, it's not performance, it's grace.
Correct. Yeah.
That's how the gospel
Correct.
changes marriage. But someone can so wound the marriage or like just abandon it, which is your point.
Yeah.
Well, would it be fair to say like
that is
would,
true?
Would it be fair to call it like participation as opposed to conditions?
There's a participatory. Yeah.
Because in a marriage covenant, you're not saying I will love you as long as you do. You know what I mean?
No.
So it's not conditional in that sense, but it does require participation from the parties. Right?
What is conditional is a marriage can be broken. Okay, so to say it's unconditional is something different. So a marriage, like, unfortunately, we're not in control of the other person's decision in the marriage. They can leave that marriage. They can break that covenant. Covenants can be broken in that way. What makes the covenant of grace so wonderful and beyond comparison is the trustworthiness of the God that offers the covenant, who's been proven to never break his word, lie, cheat, deceive.
Right.
And so, like the conditions of that covenant, he's taken on himself.
In the faithfulness of Jesus.
In the faithfulness of Jesus. Like when he promises, so like the little Bible study connection of Genesis, when God makes a covenant with Abraham cuts open some animals and lays them on the ground and waits. And then these signs appear of a flaming torch and a pot that passes between the dead animals. This is like weird to modern readers what's going on. It's a covenant ceremony in which God, as the more powerful person in the covenant, is doing a surprising thing. Because typically a covenant was extended from more powerful party one direction towards a less powerful party. Abraham would be the one normally to walk between the dead animals. And what would be the point? The point would be to say, if the covenant is broken, I will die. I'll bear the punishment of it. God does this amazing thing where he passes between the animals and says, if the covenant gets broken, it'll be restored like by my death and suffering, which is ultimately fulfilled by the death of the Son of God at the cross. And so it's this unbelievable trustworthiness. It is believable, but it's amazing, glorious, wonderful trustworthiness of the covenant giver, God, that makes that one different than our other covenants. But I would still say it's conditioned. It's still a conditioned covenant. It's just the conditions are met by him,
That's
in
a good
unique
nuance.
way.
Yeah.
It's what makes the gospel good news. It's
Yes,
like the
yes.
conditions have been met by Jesus. The payment has been paid by Jesus.
This is why when
So
we read the
can-
New Testament and we read the little phrase like faith in Jesus, like Bible scholars are always going back and forth on whether that should be translated the faith of Jesus, like that we
Yeah.
believe in him, or that he's been faithful to us. It's an honest Greek question, is like, what does it mean?
It's a good one.
Because it probably really means, both things, but at different times. But what it means is like Jesus was totally faithful, and that becomes the basis or the like nutrients of our allegiance to him,
Yeah.
our faith in him, our obeying him is because of his great faithfulness.
I was going to bring this up, and I think it's a really interesting topic, and I think we could easily get lost in the weeds here.
Yeah,
but
sorry if I
No. I think it's exactly at the heart of this balance. I think that what we're trying to go for here. But the way we talk about the gospel, the way we talk about salvation, or that topic of atonement theory, right, where we talk about like what happened at the cross, what is the mechanism by which we're reconciled with God, and what's actually going on there? How do we put that into like words? And some of the ways that we tend to talk about that, I think this. I guess it's this balance, right? Because some of the ways we tend to talk about that ends up sounding like things we understand to be more transactional, right? So our metaphors around like monetary metaphors, like Jesus paid a price, right? And it's easy for us to like put God in the position of like banker in that analogy, in that metaphor, you know what I mean? Or the legal metaphor that we use, for those kinds of things. And so it's easy to think about God being in the position of a judge, and the judge and the banker that can be a very transactional way of thinking about God. Oh, okay, well, the box is checked off. So, you know what I mean? Whereas I think the revelation of God as Father, as God as shepherd, right? Those are not transactional roles. Those are very relational roles in terms of how we understand it. So I think it's a matter of us like understanding our own lenses, so to speak, of how we think about these metaphors, how we talk about the nature of God and how we relate to God. And just, I think, being careful not to get overly transactionally minded about it.
Sure.
Like, oh, okay, well, we signed at the bottom, God signed at the bottom, and you know what I mean?
Right.
The questions like, how much can I get away with without without the deal being broken?
Yeah.
That's what kind of betrays the transactional
Or
thing.
Exactly.
I have done something so bad that now I cannot rely on God because it's so bad.
Yes. That's
Yeah.
transactional thinking.
That's absolutely transactional. Yeah.
The thing about a contract is who pays the price to restore the deal if the contract gets broken is the violator. The violator has to pay the price in a contract. That's what contract disputes even now, like legal disputes over all kinds of contracts, like who's going to pay, who broke faith here. The thing about the covenant relationships that God reveals in Scripture is it's the party that was faithful that always seems to pay, something for the restoration or maintenance of the relationship. So like we come to another person, maybe like in the church, like you talked about membership as a covenant relationship. We come to repent of some sin, but they pay a price like to maintain the relationship. Like, they choose forgiveness instead of exacting justice. They choose a non-transactional, they choose grace.
Yeah. When you forgive someone, you absorb the cost.
Yes, if I choose to forgive somebody, I absorb the cost. And again, the
Which
language
is-
sounds transactional. So I appreciate what you're saying is like, let's not get lost in that. But the point is that choice is a relationship. Like the choice is a relational extension of ourselves towards others. It's like, I'm willing to do this for you. You're.
In the
Yeah.
the Western world, here, I'll try to make this really brass tacks and practical.
Okay,
The Western world makes us think about everything as consumers, and everything's transactional. And the ancient way to look at the world, these relational dynamics. So like how God explains the gospel in family dynamics and even makes prophets enact it. Hey, Hosea, go take this is the beginning of the book of Hosea. Go take yourself a wife of whoredom and have children of whoredom, for the land commits great whoredom by forsaking the Lord. So he went and took Gomer, and this one was going to leave him. And then God basically makes Hosea's life a life lesson. He's like, yeah, you're going to receive her back. And that's actually my relationship with my people, And God's paying the price. and is faithful. It's just a different way to operate.
1 Corinthians 8 and 9 are really good on this topic because it's all about rights. It's about the topic of food that was sacrificed to idols. And Paul's pretty clear, like if you're eating in the actual temples of the false gods, that's not cool. And if you believe that these gods have some power over you, that's not cool. But he's dealing with like the strong people that know they're like, our God's in control. We're going to receive the food with thanksgiving. We have the right to do this. And he's counseling them in these 2 chapters to think about whether that's harming any of the other brothers and sisters in the church. And he gives them language like, be careful that the exercise of your rights does not become a stumbling block to the weak. This is Paul moving people from a more contractual mindset about church and relationship back into this relational. Like Paul's like, I would pay the price of not eating meat or drinking wine again if it prevented my brothers and sisters from stumbling. Like I'll absorb that, I'll live in a way that's more relational. So there is really good practical application of this conversation, even in like New Testament texts about church life together.
So what other ways does this surface in modern life? It surfaces in how people, I just want to brainstorm for a second. You referenced this earlier. It references in how the culture of the West trains us all to think about sexual relationships too,
Right.
which is just like transactional, not covenantal, not like life commitment, marriage. Hey, I want to be united with you forever, no matter what happens. We're one. I'll share everything about myself, everything I own in the world, and no matter what happens to you, I'm in. That's the covenant. No matter what, rich or poor, sick or healthy, that's covenantal versus transactional. Couldn't be more transactional. Like, as long as this is good for me, fine. But if it's not, I have the right to leave.
Yeah, I was going to say, I
anytime.
mean, on the far side of the spectrum, you have purely transactional, sexual activity like prostitution, where there's actual, might be money or who knows, an actual contract involved. But but the unspoken version of that is a contract of consent, basically. And it's like, okay, well, you're consenting and I'm consenting, so that's our contract. And that's how it becomes very transactional in nature. But yeah, it's far from being within the context of covenant. It's not even a relational mindset. It's simply I have something you want, you have something I want. Let's agree to trade, kind of thing.
Talk about a weird low denominator. If that's all our culture can say, is let's make sure this isn't assault.
Right.
Which is all consent is about.
Yeah.
But there's no greater vision for, which is why we've got to hold up, like the beautiful biblical vision of sexuality. This is beautiful. Sex is inherently a spiritual act. It's about being one with a, cross-gender oneness. So we're coming up on an hour, so this will have to be short. It's going to have to be really short, but I have a surprise question.
In a world of predictable questions, one man refuses to conform. This is Huber's surprise question.
And by the way, Steve didn't make the sound clip. John made the sound clip. It's not like Huber was sitting in his room one day like, what would make me sound amazing?
I spent like 1,000 hours,
One
hundreds of
man
dollars.
stands
I was
alone,
sitting
and
in
it's
my
me.
room.
I stand alone.
So what's one thing you would tell Christian young people who are like, look, this is trying to navigate today's world and relationships, love, sexuality. It's so confusing, so overwhelming. What's one thing you would tell young people to encourage them?
Just one thing.
Just one thing.
Just get one.
Just one thing.
I'll start, and then you guys can give better one things. But here's one. There's a quote from Jesus that isn't in the Gospels. It's like Paul knew about it, and he quotes it in one of his letters. It's more blessed to give than receive. And so, I mean, I think that's great advice for today's relationships in the world is, are we thinking about what we're giving to our friends, our family, our loved ones, our spouses, our churches? Are we thinking about that, or just what I'm getting from it? That's part of this move from the transactional to the relational. So more blessed to give than receive.
That's good.
This might sound a little bit kind of old-timey, but I guess it's the idea of there being things worth waiting for. And I think that there's a lot of pressure on young people, teens, and even preteens at this point to have this all figured out and to know where they're at and where they stand and what they want and what they don't want. And, I think oftentimes even having the conversations is just, it's an unhealthy time, to be even having certain conversations with certain young people. But, my advice to my kids and other kids has been slow down. Like, we have time to figure this out. You know what I mean? And try to relieve that kind of cultural pressure that's on people to have it all figured out.
Have everything.
Yeah.
Yeah. Have it all figured out ahead of time.
Yeah.
Driving in where my mind went, I just wanted to tell people, like, you'll tend to trust someone if you know they really, really are for you. God is for you. So I'm talking to Christian young people. God is for you. He's so for you. He loves you. He loves you. So, like, will you trust him?
Yeah.
Will you trust him? Yeah. Which is, all the warnings and proverbs and urge, hey, so get wisdom, is in the context of a loving God. It's in the context of a loving God that the verse comes, trust in the Lord with all your heart. Do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make straight your paths. Be not wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord. Turn away from evil. And it will be healing to your flesh, refreshment to your bones. He's saying it's going to be really good for you. It's going to be really good for you. You can trust the God that's for you.
Just to tack on to that, it's like that saying, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care.
Yeah,
and
that's good.
And so even, that's going to be our trust in God, as you're pointing out, but it also, we have to recognize that in our relationships with one another, that, we don't necessarily just get to come in with truth bombs, you know what I mean? And try to tell people, hey, well, this is what you ought to be doing. And it's like, that, I think this is, again, goes back to transactional versus relational, which is, what is the relationship here?
Yeah.
Are we actually caring for one another? Do we both know that?
Right.
And then within that context,
apparent?
we can talk about things that matter.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's say the truth. And sometimes that's with tears, because we love so much.
Yeah.
It's got to come with the care and the love. All right. Marsha's got the last crack.
Oh, no.
It's all up to you.
No.
Just don't ruin the podcast.
Oh, gosh. You can edit this out, right?
You just sum up,
I'm just
sum up
making jokes
everything
at
we've
this
talked
point.
about.
But what would you say to young people?
I mean, I think it's important to develop an understanding of who are safe people in your life. And so I think stewarding singleness, okay? So I always say, you should learn how to have intimate friendships with people that will prepare you for having an intimate relationship with your spouse. Intimate friendship means, letting someone know you, figuring out who safe people are, who you should let into your heart. You don't let everybody into your heart. You let certain people. And so, just really, I like to talk about core values with young people. How many young people actually have core values of, what do you really value in relationship, helping them process through. So is it vulnerability, honesty, truthfulness? Well, then you vet people. Let's say vet. It sounds transactional, but,
you got to figure out who you can trust.
You do, because it is very important. So I guess, those kinds of things. And to be slow. All of that.
It's really wise. Thank you.
Yeah.
thank you for being here.
Yeah, thanks
Marsha.
for having me.
Thanks, guys. Thank you, Jonathan. Until next time, we'll see you at the next Covenant Table podcast. Thanks so much for tuning in. Cut. Good job, team. I think we did some good stuff.
Yeah.
Bundy was like, hey, man, listen.
Thank you so much for joining us today on the Covenant Table podcast. Take this moment to leave a review and a comment in the chat. We'd love to hear from you guys. Also, go ahead and share this podcast with someone who you think would enjoy it. And we'll see you guys next time.